Hello everyone, welcome to this video. I'm excited about what we are going to be creating today, and I hope you find it useful as well. So in this video I'm going to show you how to create your own HTML and CSS text editor, just like CodePen or VS Code. And as you can see here, of course this will not have a lot of features like CodePen or VS Code, but you learn how to create the basic version and you can decide to add more features in the future, right? So as I said, it's a cool HTML and CSS playground, as you can see from the heading here, where you can practice and create websites or UI elements just like the one I have on the screen here. So let me show you the features. We have the HTML and CSS editor here. So the HTML editor, you can switch to the CSS part as well. So this is the CSS code for the UI I have here. Alright, now on the right side here is the preview section. So when you make the change here, you are going to see the preview on this side. And then you can see that we have a nice syntax highlighting in the code editor, just like in VS Code. You can also see the minimap right here, and I can even right click to see some options like format document here, just like we have in VS Code, right? So for example, if I mess up the formatting like this and I right click and say format, it is going to format it again. You can also shrink sections by holding and dragging like this part, just like this. I will show you how to create this with React Split. You could also see that I've enabled word wrap for the text editor, so you get a word wrapping feature. You can disable that. I'll show you how to do it if you don't want word wrap. So there is a React Split package we can use to create like this kind of behavior. And then when we go to the CSS side as well, we can also see the syntax highlighting. You can even import other stuff here, other CSS stuff here, like fonts and other CSS icons. You can see this color picker when you hover over the color, just like we have in VS Code. So it's a very cool text editor. It could serve as a playground for people who want to learn HTML or CSS. You can just come here and come and practice your HTML and CSS skills, right? At the top here, you could also see the theme. You can change to light theme, the text editor, and you can change it back to dark theme as well. All right. And notice that, example, if I come here, notice that when I change something, maybe if I update this, it doesn't immediately change or update the preview. It waits till I am done typing before it actually updates the preview, right? And then of course, like, all this is being persisted in local storage, right? So if I refresh this again, you see that I still have like everything I am doing here. So this is going to help you if you close this browser. You can just come back and then see what you are doing. You won't actually lose it. So we are going to integrate this with local storage. We are going to create our own custom hook, use local storage to store the state of our application together with the theme. So if I change the theme to light and I refresh this, it is still going to persist the theme. So it's going to persist the user preference, right? So I'm going to be using React TypeScript. I'm going to be using Bootstrap for easy styling. I'm also going to be using the package we are going to be using to build the editor is called Monaco editor. I will show you the docs. And then, as I said, we are also going to be using React Split. So along the way, you will learn concepts like use states, use effects. We are going to be creating our own custom hook. So you also learn how to create custom hook. You learn context API, and then also learn how to add items to local storage, right? I'm excited about this. If you are, let's actually jump into the code and start coding. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to be creating a new React application. So I have my terminal here, and I'm going to be using vets So it's similar to create React app. I can create a new React application by saying npm create vet at latest, and then this is my application name, and then the template I'm using is React.js, which is basically React TypeScript. Right. So I'm going to hit enter, and then it's going to create the boilerplate for me. Right, it's actually done, and I can do cd html css playground, and I'm going to open it with VS Code, right? So I'll do code dot. So it is done creating the application. Basically, we have some few files here, but I'll use the inbuilt VS Code terminal to install my other dependencies as well, right? I have to first of all do npm install first to install all the packages, the default packages that come with React. So I'll wait for this to finish installing, and then I'll install the other packages as well. Okay, so the installation is now done. So I'll go ahead and install the other packages as well, right? So I'll do npm install bootstrap at latest. I would also install React split, and the last one is Monaco editor React. So I'll hit enter, and then wait for these to also finish installing. Should be done in a few seconds. Alright, so now that the dependencies are done installing, I'm gonna clear my terminal. I will go ahead, and the first thing I'm gonna do is to add the bootstrap imports, right? So I want to add the CSS and the JavaScript bootstrap files. So with that, I'll go to my main.tsx. If you're using create React app, yours is going to be index.js, index.tsx, whichever one. So I will come here, and then here I'm going to add these two lines, right? So I'm going to add from the bootstrap package I installed. I'll go to dist css, and then I'll add the min file, css min file, minified file. The same with JavaScript as well. So I'll save this one, and then I'll start clearing some of the content I don't need. So I'll go to app.tsx, and then I'll clear this content because I don't need it. I will remove the use state from here. I'd also clear the imports from here. I'll also do some cleanup in this file. I will remove everything, not everything, but I'm going to remove from here. I'm going to be removing this, and then I will remove these ones as well. I'll keep the line height, the font width. I don't think I need these ones, so I'll just remove it for simplicity's sake. And then when I go to app.css, I'm going to remove everything from here as well. So save this, and now when I run npm run dev, so with vits, when you want to run the application, you use npm run dev, as it mentions here, right? With create React app, you can do npm run start, or yeah, you can just check your script in package.json. So mine is going to be npm run dev, and then when I run, it's going to run on this port 5173. So I can just open my browser here, or I can even just do control click to open it in the browser. So there is nothing here at the moment. The page is empty, but if I try to add a simple hello world just to see that something is showing, and I go back to my browser, switch to my browser, we see the hello world here. Alright, so I'm going to bring this here, make it a bit bigger, and then I'm going to bring this here as well, just so that I will be able to switch between my browser and my text editor easily. Alright, so the first I'm going to do is to create the header section. That's because it's simple enough to create. So I'm going to, inside SRC, I'm going to add a new folder called components, and then inside the components I'm going to create the header components, or header.tsx. I'm going to use React snippet to generate my component. I actually want array fc to use a named export for me, and then in here I'm going to put an h1 in here, and I will just say html-css playground. Oh, sorry, don't mean to do that. Playground like this, and it's not showing here because I need to import it in app.tsx. So instead of hello world, I will just say header, then it's going to import from component, close it, and then it's showing here now. So let me just style the header. I will use Bootstrap. It's the reason why I added Bootstrap. So I'll just make it I'll just make the background blue by using a primary color. So I'll say bg primary, and you see that, which means I have to also make the text white. So I'll just say text light. I would also add some padding Y4, and then I'll center the text center. So that's it. My header is basically done. I'll close these components. Okay, so the next thing is I'm going to try and start creating the layouts from here. I'm going to create a new folder, not in the component but in SRC. I'm going to create a new folder and call it layout. So in this layout I'm going to have 3 files in it, but I'll have the parent layout. I would call it layouts.tsx, and then this is where I'm going to be using the React split, right? So I would have a split. The split is going to be the parent component, and then inside the split I would have my other components that are going to be splitted. So I'm going to have to import React split here, but first I'll generate my component, and then I will import split. It is a default export, so I'll say import split from React split. And the way you use it, if I try to open the React split documentation, so here, after installing it, you can import it just like I've done now, and here you can add the component and put the children component inside it, right? There are some options you can actually pass. The getter size, you can pass the sizes from here. You can also pass the min size. So let's actually use it and see the kind of options we can add. So I would replace this div with the split component, and then inside it I'm going to have 2 components, the editor side and the preview side, right? But for now I'll just replace it with a div. So I'll just say editor, and then this is going to be preview. So the first option I want to add is to divide it. So I'll use the sizes as we saw there. So it's supposed to be an array. So the first one is going to take 40%, and then the second one is going to take 60%. That's how I want to by default divide it. So the editor is going to take 40% of the width of the screen by default, and then the preview is going to take 60% of the width of the screen. Right. So that's what these ones are doing. So if I have another component here, I can say maybe this is 40 and the last component is 20 or something like that. So based on the number of components you have here, you can add the sizes here as well. So I'll leave it 60/40 for 2 components now. When I save it and I go and check, it's not showing here yet. That's because I've not actually imported the layout component. So let's go ahead and import it in app.tsx as we did for the header. So I'll open app.tsx, and then here I'm going to actually add an element here called main, and then inside it I will call layout. And then when I save it, this get refreshed and I should see them here. Okay, so it's now time to add the style to make the splits work. And with that, the first thing I would do is to add a class name here. It's going to be called split, and I would have to paste the styles associated with that in app.css. This is the class I just added. It is just going to set it to display flex, and then I'm calculating the height based on the header I have, and I'm setting overflow to hidden. This is going to create the getter. By default, the split is going to give you a getter class. I have to add these classes based on what the React split documentation recommends. So these styles, I got them from the repository. I would link it below so that you can get it. This is basically adding the split line in between with some icon as the handler to hold and then drag it. Let me save this and show you what I mean. Yeah, so you see that, so the background image I added here is what you see here, right? So you can hold and drag this one. So these are the styles you need to add. I will I will link the styles in the description below so that you can have access to the styles as well. But you notice that I have my height calculated from top to bottom here. Yeah, that's because of this. Right, so my split is now working, but you notice that I can collapse it on the editor side all the way here. I want to give it a minimum size, right? So I'll go back to here and I will specify a minimum size to 300 pixels. So I'll just say min size should be 300, so that when I get to 300 pixels it won't actually shrink again. So you notice when I get here it's not going again. So I'll leave it at 300 pixels for now, which means that I can start adding my editor and my preview panels. Well, start working on the editor panel here, but quickly I want to change the title at the top here, so let me do that quickly. I'll open the index.html file, and this is where I have the title. I'll just say HTML CSS playground and then close it. As you see, it's changed. Yeah, and then I want to remove the Vite icon as well, so let me open it one more time and then remove this href from here. At least, yeah, no icon there. So I will add the tabs, that is the HTML and CSS tab. If I open Bootstrap, on the tab section here, yeah, my tab looks like this, so I'll use one of these, and then I'll come and paste it. So first of all, inside the layout I would have to create the editor panel.tsx, and then I will generate. I'm going to paste the tab code I copied from Bootstrap here. So the first thing is to change all these class properties to class name, because in React you can't say class. So I have to select all of them and then say class name. So that is fixed. I also have to change some of these in the tab index. So I have to capitalize it, tab index. It is supposed to be a number. So let me save it. All the errors are gone. So I will go to layout and then replace this one with the editor panel. It's imported from the editor panel, and then when I save it, yeah, I have my tab here. Let's go back here and start removing some stuff that we don't need. So I will just leave only 2 tabs. I remove this one, and I will also remove this one. I will change this to HTML, change this one to CSS. I want to change some of these IDs, so instead of nav home tab, I'll just say HTML tab. Change this one to HTML. Same thing, HTML, and then here too I'll say CSS. And then I'll save that. I'll come to where the content is. I would also leave 2 of the contents here. So I'll remove this one, and then I have to also change the corresponding IDs. So nav home should now be HTML, and then nav profile should now be CSS. Let me change for this as well, CSS. So I will save it. I'll put a placeholder here, HTML, just to see that the tabs are switching properly. CSS, and then yep, HTML works, CSS works as well. So I have HTML and CSS. So let me refresh this so that I get a split. Yeah, so these are working fine now. I'll add some classes to this parent element. So class name, I'm going to say h100 to make the height fit that of the parent height. I'll add some pattern y1, and then I'll make the position relative. Later we are going to position the theme switcher absolute, so it's going to be relative to this one. That's why I'm setting the position relative on it now. So I am going to remove these rounded corners from my button, so I'll just say rounded dash 0. Just remove the rounded corners from the button. I'll do the same thing for the other button as well. So by default you see the rounded corners here, so when I save it, it is going to make it sharp. And I'm also going to add some padding X. I just want the size here to be a bit bigger, like the button size here to be a bit bigger, so I'll add some paddings at the x-axis. So here I'm going to say px5, save it, and I'll do the same thing for this one as well, px-5, just to make them a little bit bigger. Yeah, HTML, CSS. Yeah, the thing I don't like about this tab is that when you switch, it actually fades in a slow manner. But yeah, that's okay. I mean, you can use whichever tab you want, but yeah, that's the only thing I don't like about this Bootstrap tab. So our HTML and CSS tabs are in place. I can now add the editors for them. I'm going to add the Monaco editor. I'm going to import the Monaco editor. It is a default export, so I can say import me editor from, so the package name is called @Monaco editor React. It's supposed to be m editor, so Monaco editor, and then I will replace here with me editor, close it, do the same thing for CSS, and now we can begin to add the options. But first of all, I want to show you the docs. Yeah, so this is like an example. On this side we have some settings here. So the languages it supports a lot of languages. You can see it supports JavaScript language, it supports HTML, it supports Java. So there are lots of languages here. You can go through a ton of them. TypeScript, VB, XML, supports Markdown as well. If I open it, say there's a Markdown editor here. Fine. Yeah, so we are using HTML and then CSS. So where is CSS? Yeah, this one. And then when you check down here, there is also some options you can actually set for the editor to enable or disable some stuff, right? So for example, this minimap here, if I go down here and search for the minimap option, where is the minimap? Alright, so I can say minimap, and then let me bring a comma here, and then say enabled false. So if I put this in string as well, so now I click apply, you see it's removed the minimap from here, right? Yeah, so these are the options we are going to add to our editor, and then enable or disable some of the options we don't actually need. On this side too, you could say it supports a lot of themes. So there are a ton of themes here you can actually use. So if I change it to light, maybe this one, I can change it to this. Yeah, so there are a lot of themes here. I am going to be using just these two themes, the light and then the dark theme. So just for the light theme, and then VS Dark for the dark theme. You can also check out the GitHub repository to you can read a bit about it, go to the introduction section and stuff like that, right? And then see how you can even set all the options as well. I'm going to create a config file inside src. I'll say new file and say config.tsx, and then I'm going to paste these options here. So I'm exporting the editor options, and I have all the options from the options I was showing you. So I've modified some of them. I'm going to remove this option because by default it is enabled. Yeah, for example, options like read only false. So if you want a read only editor, you can set it to true. Things like the folding true, you can set it to false to avoid, like if I click on this to fold and expand, right? Yeah, so there are lots of options here that you can enable. I am adding this type here, so I have to import that as well. I will bring this down, and then add the import at the top here. So I am doing import star as Monaco from, so this is where you get a type. Yeah, but basically this is ensuring that all of these are having like proper types and correct values. Right. So for example, if I change maybe this to something like true, it is going to give me an error because of the type I have here, and it's going to say that type true is not assignable to type on, off, smart, or undefined, right? Yeah. So I will save this one, and then that is what I'm going to export and add it as the options here. I'll do options and say editor options. I'm going to do the same thing for the CSS editor as well. Now the next thing is to specify which language. This is the HTML editor, this is the CSS editor, so I would have to specify default language and say HTML, default language as CSS. The height, I'll say they should fit that of the parent height. So how does it say? Height is equal to 100%. Let me save that. Yeah, I think we have it here, it's showing here, but like you can see the cursor blinking here. So I need to make sure I'm giving this the height too as well. So this is the parent div for the content, so I'll specify height h100. It's a bootstrap class, and I will do it for this as well, h100, and I will do for this one h100. So when I do that, yeah, we should now see our editor in action. I want to add some default HTML and CSS templates. So let me go to where I created a config file here. I will collapse this one. I want to add some default HTML and CSS templates so that we can actually see it working properly. Let me just copy it and bring it over. I'll paste this here. So this is the HTML default template. I'm exporting it so that I can use it there. So it's just a string with some HTML elements defined in there. For example, h1 to h6, p, hrs. So I will save it. I would also add a small template for CSS. So just a color green for h1. Right. So let me save this. I'm going back to the editor panel. Here I'm going to say default value, say HTML default template 2. I'm gonna do the same thing for this default value, and then CSS default template 2. So when I save it, yeah, and I now have it here. So this is how my HTML template is looking like, and this is how my CSS template is looking like. And straight away you can see we have the color picker option in the CSS. So as I said, Monaco editor is powered by VS Code, so it gives you like these kind of options. Right? My editor is actually working fine. We can also test the theme. So I can come here and say theme svs duck. I will do the same thing for this as well. Save it. Let's come here and see that it's changed, right? The theme is changed to dark as well. So our editor is working okay. So we just need to make sure that we can see the preview of what is here and here, right? Before the preview would work, I would have to make sure I set up the state and the context so that I keep the values from here, and then the preview can use the values and render the appropriate previews, right? So let's start setting up our context and our state, our global state. So I'm going to create the context file. So we are using React Context API. First of all, I'll create a context. I can't spell. Context.ts. I like to keep my context instance separate from when I use it. So in this file, I'm only going to say export context. So I have to make sure I have my const here. So create context, and the create context is going to be imported from React. So import create context from React, and then I am going to say I'm going to create an interface for it. I call it iContext, and then I will initialize it. I'll just say null as any, guess for now, and this is going to the iContext interface I'm going to create is going to come from my model file. So I would have a model file which I'll create in a second. So I'll have iContext in there. Let me create that quickly. So model.context React.ts, export interface, I context. So my context is always going to have two properties, that is state and then a dispatch. Yeah. So the state is going to be the state of the application, and then dispatch is going to be a dispatch action. So I'll import dispatch from React, and I'm going to be using a normal useState hook to manage this. So the type is going to be set state action, and the type for that is going to be iState as well. Just like this, iState. I've not created it, so let me try and import this from React. Import this as well from React, which also means that I have to create my state. So interface iState, and my state is going to have three properties. So the HTML value, which is going to be a string. My CSS is also going to be a string, and then I'm also going to store the theme. So it is going to be two themes, so I would like to have a type for that as well, so that I can't actually add any value apart from those two themes, right? So I would say export type editor theme, which is going to be light and then dark. So editor, and this theme is going to be of this type. Yeah. Alright, so these are my types. I would have the editor theme is going to be light or dark. If it is dark, I'm going to render the VS dark theme. If it is light, I'm going to render the light theme. Yeah, so that is basically it, and this is my context. So yeah, this is imported correctly. Now I can now save it, close this and close that. I will go to app.tsx now, and I'll start using my context here, right? So I'm going to wrap this layout in my context. So I'm just going to say context, and it's coming from the context file. If I close it, then I get a closing tag. So I have to make sure I'm always doing dot provider, and then the one props needed for the context provider is the value, right, which I'm going to pass state and dispatch. So I would now have to create my state. It's just going to be a useState state, and the set state action is going to be called dispatch. It's going to have this initial state. So if you remember, my state involves only three properties: the HTML, CSS, and then the theme. So I'll say const initial state, which is of type iState. It's going to be imported from model HTML. I'd use the default HTML default template 2, and then CSS, the initial value is also going to be CSS default template 2. My theme, I would give it a default value of dark, and then yeah, basically this is going to be the initial state. I would have to import this from React, and then I have the value, state, and dispatch. I don't need this here. Why did I add it here? So this is saying type iState is not assignable to type IDP request ready state. So let me check my context. iContext, and my iContext having a state. Oh yeah, I messed up here. So this is supposed to be iState, not this. And there you go. I now have my context around my layout, which means that every component in my layout, the editor panel as well as the preview panel I'm going to be creating, is going to have access to the state. So for that, I will go to the editor panel and then I will start using the items, the values from the state instead of having these values imported from the config file directly. So the CSS and the HTML values are my default state value, so I'm going to remove it from here. And then I'm going to use the context here. So the way I use the context, I'll say use context. Alright, and then on the context, if I import my context, which is coming from the context file, and I have to import this as well from React, I have the state, and now I can do, this is the HTML, so I can do state.html, can do state.css for the default values. Alright, so when I save it, it should be working okay. See, everything is still working fine. I still have my default HTML template and my default CSS template. So I would also use the theme here. So this is where I have the theme. Alright, so I'm going to do some conditional checks here to because this is supposed to be VS dark and not just dark. In my state I have only dark, so I'm going to just do some small check here to say that if state.theme is equal to dark, then use VS dash dark, otherwise just use state.theme. Right. Yeah, so I'll need the same thing. Copy this, replace that here, and that should be fine. So when I refresh this, it should still be dark. And just to confirm, if I go back to app.tsx and I change this to light, and I come here, maybe refresh this, should change to light, right? Same thing for this. Alright, so our state is working now. It is time to set the onChange handler for these editors, so that when I update the values from, or when I make updates, or when I change the elements in the editor, it is going to be set to the state as well, right? So for that, we are going to be using the dispatch. So I'm going to say dispatch. I will change this to actual values, not default values. So I'll make this a value because I'm going to be adding the onChange handlers now. So on the ME editor, the Monaco editor, you can have the value and then the onChange handler as well. So onChange, it's supposed to be a callback function. So here is where you get a value, and then whatever you want to do with the value, you can set the state here and pass the value to it, right? So it means this is where I'm going to be using my dispatch. So I'll just say dispatch. Now I will persist the other states and then only change the HTML element. Alright, so I'll have previous state, and then here it's supposed to be an object, so I'll say spread. Why am I typing spread? Previous state, and then say HTML. I need my comma here. Say HTML is equal to the value. When I check the value here, it's supposed to be string or undefined, but my HTML is supposed to be a string, right? So I'm just going to say a value, then pass a value, otherwise pass an empty string like this. So I would need Same thing for the CSS as well. So I'll put it here. I'll change this to CSS, and then here I will pass the value just like this. Yeah, so right now when I make changes, it is going to dispatch the changes and update their states with my CSS and HTML values. If I go to app.tsx and maybe I do, for example, I do console.log state here, and I save it. I open the console. My state object is being saved here, so my HTML, my CSS. So for example, if I change the CSS to maybe red like this, I check the last state, and then my CSS color is red here. Right. So the state is being updated. I can close this, give this a refresh. It is not persisted, so it's gone back to the green. We'll fix that shortly. So the next thing we're going to be doing is to make sure we are using the values coming from the state to show the correct preview here. I'm going to go into my layout, add a new file. I will call it preview panel.tsx. I'm going to generate it. And first of all, I'm going to close some of these files. I'll close the editor panel, close this, close the context as well. I'll come here and I will replace this with my preview panel. Saved it as well. Let's go here and we have preview panel here. So let's go into preview panel and see what we are going to be doing. I'm going to be using iframe to get my output on the screen. Right. So first of all, I'm going to, inside this div, I will add an iframe. So it's going to be a self-closing element, and the first prop I need on the iframe is the src, the document source. So it's called src doc. This is basically going to render an HTML template in a form of a string. So that is the source document. So I can have a structure like this. If I put an HTML template here, so HTML with a closing tag, and then inside it I can have my style here, for example, and then the body is going to come after that, just like a regular HTML. I can even have a script tag as well after the body, or inside the body, or on top here. It does not really matter. And then here is where your styles are going to go, and here is where your actual HTML elements are going to go, right? So at the end of the day, I'm going to replace this with my HTML value coming from the editor. So here is going to be something like states.html, and here it's also going to be something like states.css, and then this I can say constant src doc is equal to this. So this is going to be my source document, and that's what I'm going to be adding here. Right. So let me save this and show you how it looks like. So at the end of the day, I would have states.html because it is only showing what is in the body. Right? The style is going to be the styles applied to what is here. So here, if I say h1 and I say hello world, for example, see I have my h1 here. Right. So that's what we are going to be using to render the content from our editor using iframe. So there are a couple of required props that I need to specify. So the first one, I'll just give it a title and say it is output. I'd specify the width. It will be 100%. I'll also add a height. Height, that should also be 100% of the parent container, and that should be it for the elements we have here. Now here I'm going to give it a class and give it some few styling. I'll add a padding, just give a space inside the component, just give some few spaces inside the, just give a little space inside the parent elements. So padding 3, I'll add some border bottom, and then I would also say margin X, this one, just to keep it away from the edges a little bit. Okay, so this is going to be my element, and here I can now use the context here and pass the values from the state. Right, so use context. So this is supposed to be my context. Import from here. I would need to import this from React. And then here I need the state, just the state. I'm not going to dispatch anything from here, so I just need the state, and then I can now replace this with state.css, and this is going to be state.html. So when I save it, let's see what happens. There you go. So it is now rendering my HTML and CSS template from the editor onto the screen. So whatever element you have here, you're gonna get the appropriate HTML element. So you can create a complete website with this, right? Alright, so exciting times. We have our editor coming together. Next thing I'm going to do here is to make sure I put this in a use effect hook. And the idea here is that when we start to enter, it is going to change this directly. I mean, as soon as we enter something, you see here, you see down here, as soon as I begin to enter, it does a lot of re-rendering, right? I don't want that behavior, so I'm going to use a use effect hook. It is going to listen to the HTML and CSS with a timeout, so that it only renders the content if I stop typing. So I'll be clearing the timeout if I am still typing. Alright, so that's the idea. I continue to type. I don't want to show the output unless I am done typing or I stop typing at some point. And then I'll set a timer to maybe 1 second. Yeah, that looks fair. So that if I stop typing after 1 second, it displays the content. If I stop typing and it's not up to 1 second, I continue, it's going to clear the timeout and it's not going to show the output. So it will only show the output when I stop typing and it's after 1 second. Right? So that's what we're going to be doing. So let's set it up. I'm going to say use effect, then I will generate the boilerplate. I'll generate it, and then here I'm going to create a timer const timeout is equal to our user timeout. I would have the callback function, and then the time I want this to be out is going to be 100 millisecond. It's going to be 1 second, that is 1000 milliseconds. You can change it to whichever time you feel is appropriate for you. I'll keep it at 1 second for now. And then inside here I'm going to set this src doc. Right, so I'll say constant, let me just do the formatting a bit. So constant src doc is going to be exactly this, nothing is going to change. and then here I'm going to set a state. So set src doc, which is going to be this. So I'm going to manage a local state as well. So I'm going to say use state, generate that. This is going to be say src doc, and then set src doc, and then I would have to import this, and then initially it's going to be an empty string, and I did not import the use effect as well. Let me import that. So basically this is what we are setting here, and this is what is being used here now, because this is now in the use effect, so it can't be used here. So the src doc here is now the value coming from here, and I'm updating the value in the use effect here. Right. So after 1 second, it is going to make sure it updates the document so that it can render, but I want to make sure I am clearing the timeout if I continue to type, right? So I can just use this return the use effect cleanup function to do that. So here I'll just say clear timeout, and then pass that timeout, this one here, and then I have to make sure that I'm adding my dependencies as well. So this is going to be state.html and state.css. So this use effect is only going to run if the HTML or CSS is changing. Right. Let me save it, get a bit of formatting, remove some of the imports I don't need, and then yeah, everything should be working as it is. So the changes though is that when I begin to add stuff here, for example, say it's not changing immediately unless I stop typing after 1 second, then it shows. Alright. Yeah, that's working fine. I'm getting some behavior here. Looks like this is not going all the way here, so let me check what's the reason why. So the width here is 100. Yeah, maybe I just need to say width 100 here as well. Yeah, that fixes it. Everything is working now. We have our HTML editor working as CSS editor. So if I change this to maybe blue, it's going to change this. Let me remove the extra content I have here. And then I can even say background color should be maybe black. Yeah, I can change this to white. Now I can add some padding of 20 pixels. There you go. I can say text center. It's supposed to be text align center, right? Yeah, so I mean everything is working fine. Our editor is working fine. Our preview panel is also working properly. Yeah, so it is time to add the theme switcher now to be able to switch between light and dark themes. Right? Let's do that. So with that, I'm going to create a new component called theme switcher. So inside the component, I'll call it theme switcher .tsx rfc. This one, I will save it. I'm going to come to where my editor panel is. Open editor panel. Here I'm going to add a div which is going to contain the theme switcher, and I'm going to use my theme switcher component here, right? So import it from here, and I added the position relative here. Now if I save it as it is, it's going to appear on top here, but I want it to be positioned here, like at the right side of where the tabs are. So I would say class name, use a bootstrap class position absolute, save it. Now I have it here. Then I'm going to do end-0 just to push it to the right side, and I'm also going to add a little bit margin to give a little bit of space there. So margin end 1 like this. So it's now here. Now I'm going to replace this with the drop down to be able to select the dark and light theme. So I'll go into my theme switcher component. I will use bootstrap, so I'll open the bootstrap documentation again. This time I need a drop down, so I'll click on the drop down, and then yeah, I can use something like this. So I'll copy this, close this, and then come and replace it with this. Now I need to change my classes again, all the classes to class name, save it. I should see it working here. I'm going to change the color. So instead of BTN secondary, I'm gonna say light. We should make it light, and I'm going to change this one to dark. Yeah, I'm going to change this to dark for now. I will replace it with the state value, the current state value, but here is going to be the first item, which is going to be dark, and then the second item is going to be light. I will need this third item. So we have light and dark here. It's not working with the state yet, so let's do that. I will use my context to use context. I will do structure. I need a state, context. I need to import this from React. Then I am going to replace it with a current value, say state.theme, like this. And then for these items, when I select this, I want it to dispatch the current theme value into the state. So I'm actually going to remove these A tags around these items. Save this, and then I'll add on click to these. So on click, so the on click is going to dispatch the theme values into the state, and with that I'm going to use a function up here. I'm just going to say constant set theme is equal to, now I am accepting the theme from here, which is of type editor theme. It's going to be an arrow function. I need to use a dispatch, so I destructured that, and I say it should dispatch. It should keep all the other values of the state, so prev state spread dot previous state, and then the theme is going to be set to the theme value coming from here. Right, so here I'm going to pass my callback function. I'm going to say set theme, and then the values, this is going to be dark and this is going to be light, just like that. Now I have to make sure that because I removed the anchor tags, I'm adding the class drop down item, drop down dash item here. So when I come here, I have my light and dark. So let's try and change this. There you go. So our theme is also working. Light, dark, and switch to light again, and then dark. All right. Yeah, so our theme is also working. I want to add a label here saying theme. So with that, I can just come up here, add a span, and just say theme, and give it a space. So margin x2 like this, and then it's actually pushing it down. So let's see, let me check why it's pushing it down. So let me actually add it here. Yeah, actually fine. So our theme switching is also working fine. We can change it. We can change it to dark theme as well. Same, dark, then light. Nice. Yeah, so our editor is working. We're almost done with the features. Let me do a quick refresh. Try to expand and shrink. See, the only thing left now is that when after I refresh this, it's gone back to the default templates we have. So we are now going to create a custom hook. We are now going to sync our state values with local storage so that it persists the user preference. So if I change the theme, it is going to keep it in local storage. If I update the values, if I update the CSS or the HTML, it is going to keep it in memory so that if I refresh, I don't lose my current changes, right? So let's create our custom hook now. So inside SRC, I'm going to add another folder and call it hooks. Now I'm going to have the only one hook I'm going to be creating, use local storage. So I mean, React hooks are supposed to have this naming convention, right? Starting with use, just like we've been seeing with use context, use state, use effect, and all that. When you're creating a custom hook, they are supposed to have the same naming convention. I will be using use effect and use state hooks in this my custom hook. So I'm going to import that. So use effect, use state from React function, use local storage. So MST here. And then here I'm going to pass a key which is going to be a string, and then an initial state value which I'm going to store in local storage, right? So I would have initial value. Let me just say any, because we want to be able to use it to store any value at all. If it is a string, if it's an object, if it is a number, whatever. So I would have an any initial value, and on top here I'm going to create a prefix, right? So you see what I will be using the prefix for. So I'll call it const prefix, which is going to be ms playground, and then I'll add a dash here. This is going to be a prefix, and we are going to add the key we will pass here to it. So basically we just want to store items in our local storage with unique values, and we could easily identify them with our ms playground. We know that this is coming from our application. So we have this prefix ms playground states. If I pass the key as state, so if I was going to pass like individual state values like HTML, CSS, it's going to be like ms playground HTML, ms playground CSS. In this example, we are going to be passing all the objects as one state to this. So I'm going to call the key state. So I'll say ms playground states, right? So basically storing the state of our ms playground, that is our HTML and CSS playground. Prefix key is going to be prefix and then plus the key. Actually, I prefer to do it like this. Just use template strings, and then in here I'm going to say prefix, and I'm gonna say key as well, and then key. And then I am going to use the use state here. Alright, so the way we use the use state normally is just saying use states. So I usually like generating it like this, and this is going to be our local storage value, the value that's going to come from our local storage. And this is going to be set value. This is going to update the state. And then instead of a normal value, we are rather going to pass a function, right? So useState can accept functions to as a value. So whatever the function is going to return is what is going to be the value of the state. Alright, so we have the function here. We're going to check a couple of things. We're going to check if the window is not undefined, because when we do local storage or get item, it could be undefined. So we have to check if window is not undefined, so that we can get the local storage item. So we say if type of window is not equal to undefined, we can now get a value, the local storage value, right? So we say constant, call it JSON value. So the JSON value is going to be local storage dot get item, and then I'll use the prefixed key like this, and I am going to say if the JSON value is not actually null, if there is actually an item for that, then it should return that item, right? So return, and I'm going to say JSON dot pass. Sorry, it's supposed to be JSON dot pass and then JSON value. That's because this is going to be stored as string. All the time in local storage we store items as strings, right? So when we are getting the items, we need to make sure we pass it into the right format. So if it is an object, do JSON.parse, it is going to return it as an object. If it is a string, when you do JSON.parse, it's going to return it as a string. After this one check, we want to say that if type of, now we want to say if type of the value we are going to be passing here, if it is a function, because I told you that states can have values as functions, right? They can have like functions as values, and then the return value of that function is what is going to be returned by the state. So we have to now check the value of the initial value we are passing. If it is a function, then we have to make sure we are calling the function so that it returns the value. The type of initial value is a function, then it means we have to call it to get a value. So we say return initial value like this. Otherwise it should just return the value. It should be initial value, no value. If there is no item here, it's going to check the initial value we pass and then return the initial value to us. So we're also going to use the use effect. So the use effect is going to check our prefix key and a value. This value, if it changes, then it's going to update the local storage with that new value, right? So I would say use effect. Let me generate that. I wouldn't need the cleanup function, so this is going to say local storage dot set item. I have to pass the key, which is going to be prefixed key, and then I need to make sure I am doing JSON.stringify because it's supposed to be a string. I pass the value, which is going to be returned by this state. The dependencies, it should happen when the prefixed key changed and also when the value changes, right? return the value and then the set value. So when I call this, it is going to update the state and then we can get it as the value. So our custom hook is done. We can now start using it, and where we are going to be using it is app.tsx. This is where we have our state. So instead of having a regular state here, we will now use our custom hook, right? So I would say use local storage like this, and we have to pass the key and then the initial value. Right. So our initial value is going to be the initial state. The key is going to be a string called state, and this is what I am going to get. So I get a state and then a dispatch. Need this, right? And everything should be working as it is. So now if I open applications and I check local storage here, you now see that we have ms playground state. So we have the prefix and then the key, and these are the items it is storing now. So it stores our initial values, and when I start to make changes to the CSS, that's what we're going to see properly. Let me change this to red again. You see that local storage state is also updating to red, right? So this is now synced. If I refresh this, we are still going to have it because local storage is keeping the value. Let me close this, expand this, and then change the theme as well to dark. Try to refresh this and it is still dark, right? Yeah, so our application is basically done. We have everything in place. Let me actually copy the template I had in the demo application in here just to see everything is working fine. I will make this big now, expand this a bit, and then should be, I will replace this template with that. Yeah, so there's no styling yet. I'll copy the CSS as well and then replace it with this. Everything is working fine, even with the font import and everything. It's actually working fine. You can actually add more features to this editor if you want. I mean, thank you for watching. All links are going to be in the description below. The CSS files I was using, I'm going to link them in the description below. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel. I have a lot of projects I'm going to share with you. If you want to stay updated, hit the notification icon as well. Leave your comments below. I will see you in the next video. Thank you.